attend today, so I'll be filling in. I'm Theodore.
Hey! Get out of my desk! Hello, everybody, and welcome back to episode 6 of the Collective Record. As always, I'm Owen Riel. This is Emma Kaser, and we're going to be covering some interesting topics today. We have 3 segments today, and we're going to quickly talk about poppies before we get into those. So I just want to say, this time of year, Remembrance Day is on November 11th. And it's really important, especially us as young people, that we go out and we buy poppies and we support the Legion, because all the donations that you give when you go and get a poppy, they go to Canadian health organizations that help the elderly, welfare systems for veterans. And at a time where homeless veterans are almost commonplace in Canada, it's really important for us to support them. So go out and buy a poppy and wear it until the end of Remembrance Day. So yeah. That's that. Just wanted to say that because it's very important. I have mine right here. So we're going to move into our first segment of the day, which is unionization and its benefits. So in Canada, unionization from 1981 to 2014 has dropped 8% across the board in the private and the public sector. And union membership currently sits around 30%. So less than a third of workers are unionized. And some industries have an incredibly low unionization rate. Those industries are accommodation and food service at 6%, agriculture at 4%, scientific and technical services at 5%, and retail trade at 12%. And I don't know if you noticed when I read those off, but those industries, especially food service and retail, are way more often young workers who are not unionized. And when you are in a union, you experience roughly a pay of $5.50 more per hour when you're in a union. And you get more sick days and more vacation time on average, according to CUPE. So it's very important, that workers be unionized, because in an age where prices and wages are so far apart, like they've never been before, because we've never, in modern history, at least in the last 50 years, we've never had a time where wages compared to prices were so low. I mean, look at housing prices. They've gone up compared to wages by 4 times in the last, I believe, 40 years. It's insane. And university tuition is insane, the amount it is compared to our wages now. So it's very important to do what we can as young people to try and raise our wages, especially when we're working full-time jobs. And part of that solution is unionization, because union workers are so much better off. And this is evidenced by the fact that in Ontario, in Canada, over 70% of public sector workers who work for the government, either directly or indirectly, are part of a union. And less than 16% of private sector workers are in a union. And in Ontario, the pay difference between them is 10%. 10%, think about that. Every paycheck a public sector worker gets compared to a private sector worker, they're getting 10% more. So think about that. That speaks to the effectiveness of unions and how important it is for us as young people to look at these, food service. Let's talk about McDonald's, for example. It's not unheard of for young people to be working full-time at McDonald's or at Wendy's or other places, right? And these workers are not unionized. And as a result, they're getting paid far less than their unionized counterparts in health services and libraries and construction and manufacturing, right? Now, not that the pay will ever be equal between someone who works in the food service industry and construction, obviously not. But any increase in pay for these people is incredibly important, because these people are the most vulnerable in our society, right? Because they're often making minimum wage, and minimum wage in a lot of places is not enough to live, and they have to accept social services as part of that. So unions are important, especially when people work for big corporations, to make sure that people are getting a fair wage and a wage that they're actually able to live off of. One thing, when I was talking about this segment with a couple people, they noted one big downside about unions that I just wanted to address. So seniority laws are often not looked upon very fondly by people, because I think people have the impression that seniority laws keep lazy people in their jobs because they've been around longer. And in some cases, this is true, right? In some cases, seniority laws are not built to work for people. But I don't know that that's so much a union issue as it is an issue with the collective agreement of that specific place, right? Because that's what unions operate off of. They operate on collective agreements, which are agreed upon by the union of the workers and the employer, right? So every 3 years or so, when the contract is up, the union and the workers, and the union on behalf of the workers, renegotiate a contract. And if there is a seniority clause, it's most often because the workers of that place are looking for a seniority clause in their collective agreement, because that's what they view to be the most effective, right? A union is only a function of what the workers' demands are in a particular workplace. It's not like the union is this big scary machine that's coming up with arbitrary rules about what employers have to do for employees. It's just not the case. Unions are a product of the collective agreements that workers push for in their workplaces and in their branch of workplaces. Let's say maybe 4 different McDonald's are under the same union, if that were the case, and they all have the same collective agreement. But generally, because they're in the same branch of the union, they're all working for the same values in their workplace. So seniority laws, yes, well, I understand in a lot of workplaces they are frustrating, and that's totally valid that some people feel they're frustrating, but that's not something that's the product of a union. It's not the union's fault. It's something you need to be bringing up at your regular union meetings if you're attending those, and talking to your union and saying, hey, this isn't good. Can we do something about this? Can we change the rule, or can we get rid of the rule? And the other workers in your workplace maybe silently agree, and then they'll say, yeah, I agree with that. Or maybe the majority doesn't think so. Maybe the majority thinks, no, I think we do need to have these seniority laws. But the overall point is that that's not a product of the union. That's a product of the workers who are trying to dictate the collective agreement for your side, right? Unions are only the product of the opinion of the people in them, most often. There are administrative feelings, but most often the opinions of the workers are prevalent. And I think in an age where young people are struggling to get by, and homeownership is very low in millennials compared to the generations before them, I think we need to have a discussion about what role unions might play in making life affordable for people, because we know countries that are highly unionized, like the Scandinavian countries, their wages are far greater than ours. I just think, I wanted to bring that up because I think when we have this discussion, I know I talked about last episode, young people really need to start pushing. And I think maybe this is one of the ways. Maybe you need to push your government to have more union-friendly laws so that you in your workplace feel more empowered to start a union or create a local that you can join a bigger union, right? It all depends on your workplace, and it depends on the laws that govern unions in your province or the country as a whole. Yeah. Do you have any thoughts, Emma?
Well, I was just looking something up about it actually. Because I know that some places, some big corporations, their employees don't have unions.
Yes.
So I was looking at Walmart, which employs about 1.4 million people in the States, and not a single one of these people are in a union. And it is because Walmart does not want these people to be in a union, right? And uses strategies to kind of keep them from unionizing. So there's this one case that's cited in an article here where it says 10 meat cutters at a Walmart supercenter in Jacksonville, Texas, voted 7-3 to affiliate with Local 540 of the United Food and Commercial Workers International Union. This is in the Globalist, by the way. And then within days of this vote, Walmart announced that it was phasing out meat cutting at all of its supercenters, starting with that store in Jacksonville. So obviously all these people were let go, right? I mean...
And that's a product of the amount of corporate control over our economy that has been allowed to happen for really over a century, right? This sort of happened in the Gilded Age in the early 1900s when corporations had this huge reign. Then you had Teddy Roosevelt came in and kind of broke up the corporations, and he was the break 'em up guy and broke up these corporations so they didn't have so much power. And then union membership kind of started to tick upwards, and then somewhere in the 90s era it kind of started to go back down, coincidentally, because a lot of regulations after Ronald Reagan started to strip away a lot of rights for workers. And I remember seeing a video of this Amazon worker who said something like, "Oh, I love it at Amazon. There's no way we would ever need a union here." And then someone brought up the point to me, like, what do you think the chances are that Jeff Bezos is breathing down this guy's neck?
Yeah.
Like going, "You better not talk about unions. Unions are terrible. I hate them." Because this guy,
you get brainwashed when you work at a big corporation. Like, I worked at a fast food restaurant for a while, and just every single training video is like, "This place is great. We do this and we're so good." And you get brainwashed to believe that where you're working is a good place, even if you're working under horrible conditions and you're not getting paid a lot and your hours are horrific, right?
And one thing I've noticed is people in like working in fast food places mostly, I've noticed that if there is a problem, like they're understaffed or anything like that, I talk to them and I say, "Well, why don't you go to your boss and talk about it?"
Oh, no.
And then they say, "Are you kidding me? There's no way I would ever do that."
You would never. I would never.
Because there's so much fear that you're just going to get fired right off the spot for even questioning something that's going on in your workplace. And questioning decisions in your workplace if something seriously bad is going on. Like when normally you need 8 workers for a shift and you only have 4,
We have that all the time where I work.
You should be able to go to your boss and say, "Hey, not in a disrespectful way, because you can't disrespectful your boss, but you should be able to go and say, 'Hey, we had this shift where we normally have 8 people, but we only had 4, and that was really difficult, and we really had a hard time getting the orders out. Just thought I'd bring that to your attention.'" And you shouldn't have any fear of being fired for that. And that's what I think in the fast food sector, that's what unions would do if we could ever, if we could get the worker protection that is needed. That's what they would do. Unions would be there in case of grievances, if or a pay scale as well.
And I feel like this Walmart example, it's the same in fast food. You wouldn't unionize because you'd be scared of what the company would do.
Yeah, exactly. Like, if you're scared to talk about your boss about something so trivial, what if something serious happened? Like you almost feel like you have no rights as a worker without a union sometimes, because you can't. There's no structure for you to go and talk to people about things. The union is there basically so that you can't be walked all over, right?
And they do have like in-company, I know a lot of places have in-company like systems in place, like a speak up program or something like that, but it's like greenwashing, right? It's something you're doing, but it's not really a thing.
But there's still fear. Like there's still a ton of
fear.
No
one actually follows this policy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think, let's go back to the stats that I have here. What did it say? Accommodation and food service union membership, 6%. That's incredibly low. And I know people say, "Oh, it's McDonald's workers. What do they need help?" It's like, I know. First of all,
well, that's inaccurate. I mean, McDonald's.
First of all, it's like, relax.
I know fast food workers are,
It's like, okay, don't even. That's a stupid argument. But regardless of that. Like, it's not even necessarily, don't even factor in any more pay as far as unions say. Say they'd make the same amount. Don't you think it's valuable for them to have a structure, have a union meeting 3 times a year, just so that if they do have a grievance and they feel they're being short-staffed or a manager is treating them poorly, that they can go to their union and say, "Hey, we're really having an issue here. Can you as our rep go and talk to our employer so that we can work this out and feel more safe in our workplace?" Because if that structure doesn't exist, people don't feel safe in their workplaces. And that in a modern an industrialized country such as ours, I don't think that's acceptable for people to feel unsafe in their workplace. And that's something the governments talk about a lot. They want to make people feel comfortable in their workplaces. They want inclusion. They want equality in their workplaces. Not even just
unsafe, but just disrespectful, right?
But even equality, like on the QP website, they said on average, the pay equity gap is smaller in places that are unionized because there's a pay scale and there's a system in place. Because there's someone to hold
the corporations accountable.
Yes.
We talk about this all the time. We need more accountability.
Yes. And that's what we're talking about is corporations and large businesses. Obviously, small businesses, that's a totally separate issue. And small businesses are like, businesses with 3 employees.
Yeah,
that's not a place
what
where
we
you need a
mean.
union.
We mean
right?
like McDonald's.
Yes. You just have to be careful, right? Because we don't want people thinking like, oh, I'm a construction business owner and I have 3 employees. Am I going to get unionized and have to deal with all this bureaucracy? It's like, no, it's only for large and maybe medium-sized companies where we just need to make sure that the worker protections are there and that everyone's being treated fairly, right? That's really that's what unions are supposed to be at their core, and often are at their core, is just a fairness check to make sure that everything is going smoothly. Yeah. I just wanted to talk about that because I've been seeing that a lot lately, and I really think it's a good thing. Unions are good. Don't be trashing unions.
Who have you heard trashing unions? No. I've never heard anyone trash unions.
I have. Well,
you're just out on the street and someone comes up to you and goes,
I hate
unions.
They suck. No, I've heard some things. People really they're legitimately. And I understand some of them because it's like seniority stuff where people who are obviously should not be in a job are put in jobs where they don't belong. Yeah. And that's fair, right? But yeah, some people are very, very they hate unions, just like hate unions, and they're very angry with unions. And I don't really
be one of these people.
I don't really get it. But hey, it is what it is, I guess. Yeah.
All right.
So, yeah, I think we're good with that topic. So we're going to move on to Emma's segment about single-use plastics. Dun, dun, dun.
All right, well, ignore that little drum roll or whatever that was. But we are going to talk a little bit more about single-use plastics. It's been kind of a topic of debate recently. I don't know. I think we talked about it before on the Collective Record too. Tim Hortons getting rid of its plastic straws for its iced coffee lids. Now they have those, massive plastic lids. Okay, so we're gonna talk a little bit more about single-use plastic, why it's so bad for our planet, and what we can kind of, do to reduce it. So first of all, single-use plastic is really around us everywhere. If you go to the grocery store, you're going to be buying almost all your produce, your fresh produce, your drinks. Everything is in plastic, right? And it's plastic that you're going to throw away after one use. Single use. So the issue with plastic is that it never biodegrades, right? So if you have your plastic water bottle, right, you're going to spend half a day drinking it, you're going to throw it out. And it's going to exist for 400 more years.
Excuse me, it biodegrades after 1,000 years. I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay, but even then, so yes, you have your plastic bottle, you throw it out, it ends up in the ocean, perhaps. 500 years later, it has not biodegraded, it has broken down into microplastics, right? So it never actually, disappears. What you will have are microplastics that end up in, our food, that end up in our soil or water, that are just everywhere polluting our earth. Plus, for those 500 years, you're going to have a literal plastic bottle that is not broken down, somewhere in an ocean or a landfill. So, we talk a lot about recycling, proper recycling, but really, when you boil it down, only 9% of all plastic is actually recycled worldwide, according to National Geographic. So that is a very reputable source here. The other 91% end up in our oceans, end up in our landfills, end up, it's horrific. But let's go over some specific statistics to really show how bad this problem is. So every year, Canadians throw away over 3 million tons of plastic waste.
Oh my God.
Over 3 million tons. And we're only talking Canadians here, not the rest of the world. And these 3 million tons of plastic waste are up to $8 billion per year that are just lost. Right? $8 billion. Go down the drain. Bye-bye.
Oh, and by the way, this applies to those stupid milk bags we have too.
What stupid milk bags?
Have you gotten milk in Canada?
Oh.
Yeah, those milk bags, that is a single-use plastic, and it's really bad. I know as Canadians, it's like, oh, it's our milk bags, man. It's cultural. It's our thing.
No, please don't.
They're not good. No. Get a carton. Get it in a carton. I know, it's a cultural staple. Yes, I understand, and I know.
Or a glass bottle.
Glass bottles. Well, those are pretty rare nowadays.
What? It's true.
I don't
it's
think
true.
I've ever
it
seen one in
depends
the
on where
grocery
you're
store.
going grocery shopping.
But
we'll go into that more later. It's
yes,
a point down the list.
we'll do a little video where we're like shopping in the grocery store, trying to find glass milk bottles.
Oh,
Yeah,
we should
let's
totally
do that.
do
We
that.
should do that. Okay.
All right, we'll get on that.
That
Okay,
may be
let's keep
coming.
going. So, about 1/3 of the plastics used in Canada are for single use or, other kind of short-lived packaging products, stuff like that. And kind of in that area, up to 15 billion plastic bags are used every year, and close to 57 million straws are used daily.
Save the turtles.
Save the turtles.
There is no way you just did that live.
Yes, I did.
I'm so upset.
I had to reference the Visco girl thing. I apologize to everyone who is currently watching.
I'm just
But
gonna
no,
leave.
this is, there's a reason why straws have been kind of on the agenda. Obviously, yes, let's not use plastic straws, but when we're talking about plastic straws, we need to, talk about how they're only a very small part of the problem, right? So yes, they are single-use plastic. Should we be using them? Absolutely not. But that should not be where all of our attention is, right? I'm going to tell you where our attention should be.
Ooh.
So, every year, 640,000 tons of abandoned, lost, or discarded fishing gear enters our ocean. This can kind of keep, stay alive, not break down into microplastics or anything, for up to 600 years. So that means the majority of plastic waste, or kind of just garbage in general in our oceans, it's not straws, some of it's straws, some of it's plastic bottles, but most of it are fishing nets and other fishing waste. So a statistic that goes along with this is that according to the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, 35% of fish caught in the ocean never actually get eaten or make it to a grocery store. And you want to know why? They're not caught by people on a fishing boat trying to catch fish. They're caught in random fishing nets that are lost in the ocean and then just die because they're caught in a fishing net. I mean, that's horrific, right? So yes, let's focus on plastic straws. Let's stop using them. Let's get rid of the, coffee cups that we can't recycle, plastic bottles, but we really need to be focusing on this fishing waste and the corporations that are producing this fishing waste.
Well, and that's what I was gonna say when you were talking about plastic bags.
Oh, wait, I have another one.
Okay,
So,
sorry.
Just in line with that one, every year 1 million birds and over 100,000 sea mammals worldwide are injured or die when they mistake plastic for food or become entangled in like a fishing net or something like that.
Yeah, so
Go ahead.
So I wanted to bring up plastic bags again because every time you go to the grocery store, okay, so we're talking, I don't know, Sobeys, Walmart, any place you go to get like pretty much any food.
I gotta give Sobeys credit though; they have paper bags now.
They do, yes. Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
So yes, Sobeys does have paper bags now.
Yeah.
But why are more places not doing that? You got to ask yourself that. Why is Walmart? Let's talk about Walmart because I like to beat up Walmart. Why is Walmart not using paper bags yet? Is it because they can't afford it? Something tells me that that's not why. Something tells me that $14 billion in profit a year Walmart can afford to switch to paper bags.
Plus, it's like the amount that it's... Paper bags are more than plastic bags, but by a tiny amount. Like, it's almost nothing.
Yeah, it's
you can't say
pretty
that
small.
You can't afford
right,
paper
and it's
bags.
really it's laziness by corporations that don't want to change, and that's why I thought when we had before the election when we had finally had the discussion about single-use plastics, and although that's not enough as far as environmental policy, that's a good first step because that's a serious issue, and plastic bags are like one of the worst things in our society that are so commonplace.
Yeah. Okay, so, and then just one more heartbreaking statistic. Globally, one garbage truckload of plastic waste enters the ocean every minute. Every minute. We are sitting here like we've been doing this segment for about 24 minutes. That's 24 garbage truckloads of plastic waste more in our oceans.
Really think about that. That's crazy.
It is crazy. I mean, that's just... Yeah. Okay, so we already talked a little bit about the whole, straw debate. I did a Visco Girl impression. I think Owen will be holding that against me for a while.
Oh, for a very long time.
But yeah, so part of that is kind of what I'm trying to get at here is that yes, we have that individual responsibility, right? I should not be using a plastic straw, I should be using a reusable one. But we also have to hold corporations accountable, right?
Mhm.
Like, for example, because of the fishing waste or corporations that are producing plastic straws in the first place, right? So I think it's kind of about finding that balance between individual responsibility and corporate, corporate governmental responsibility, right? So we need to stop using plastic straws. We need to encourage the fishing industry to move towards, not polluting our oceans or stop eating fish. I know that's not a very popular opinion, but truly that is probably what we should be doing. We should not be eating fish anymore.
Well, we need to work on sustainable ways of
but
fishing.
there is, it's hard to find a sustainable way right now,
Yeah.
unless you're fishing yourself, which is good for you.
Yeah. Well, I think across the board too, we can't just tell people like stop doing this because
No.
because the reality is people aren't going to stop.
That's what I'm saying. So for this whole thing of like the meatless Mondays, and it's like kind of like a funny concept, but maybe that's part of it. Of that whole supply and demand thing, right? We stop buying so much fish. We start saying to companies, we know that you are polluting our oceans. We want you to stop. Will they change their ways? Well, we're their customers. If they don't, what if we stop buying their products, right? Because we do live in a consumer capitalist society. So we have to understand that. We have to understand that we are not just voting, in our elections, but we're voting with our wallets every time we buy something, right? Every time I, go to Tim Hortons and buy a plastic cup, which I sadly do a lot. I should not be doing that. I'm working on it. I promise. Right? I am telling the company that I want their product. So we have to keep that in mind as consumers in our society.
Yeah. But we also have to take it from the government perspective too.
Absolutely.
The government,
it's both. Absolutely.
Yeah, we need to, protest if we have to, but at least vote in a way that indicates that we want to make a change. Because there are changes that can be made by, refusing to buy certain products, but the overarching force in our society is the government.
We need to force our government to hold corporations accountable. And hold them accountable ourselves by being that consumer.
It's not about asking anymore. That's kind of a theme on our show. It's not really about asking anymore. It's about telling.
But it's both. We can't just say it's one or the other, right? I can't just keep buying my, Tim Hortons in a plastic cup every day and saying to the government, stop, make this corporation stop doing that. I have to be doing both, or else I'm a hypocrite. We can't be hypocrites anymore at this point.
We've got to be environmentalists, and we got to be strong.
Hell yeah. I don't know how I feel about this, but yeah.
It's a strong pose.
All right. Let's ignore Owen. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about life before plastic, because plastic actually only became, commonly used all the time for absolutely everything around the 1960s. But, we still had a society before that, right? We were not living in caves or anything. So like drinks, milk, we were talking about earlier, all that was in glass bottles. And you could bring these glass bottles back to a store and you would get a very small amount of money for it. Which actually a lot of European countries are doing right now. Like in Germany, you can buy most things like water and I don't know about milk, but I know you can buy water and like Coke and stuff in glass bottles and you can return them to the grocery store and they will give you money for the glass bottles. So that's something that used to be the case. Some European countries are reinstating it. And I think, we might want to consider going back to glass more because it can be reused. And it, glass in our oceans, it's not really an issue because it can be reused. And then a lot of other items were kind of sold in bulk. Like, if you go to Bulk Bar now, it's kind of that principle, but except for the plastic bags, other than the plastic bags, you would have kind of like brown paper bags that stuff would be in. Yeah. Yeah, and then meat would be wrapped, which probably you've seen in like old movies, would just kind of be wrapped in like paper.
Well, that's what butchers do. Yeah, right. That's what a lot of butchers, like if you go to, I know we have a couple of butchers in town, and almost all of them wrap their meat in paper instead of doing the stupid plastic things.
You don't need the plastic. It's there because We have the packaging industry. This is an industry. This is not just, someone decides to wrap something in plastic. We have a whole industry based off of producing plastic and wrapping things in plastic.
And that's where a lot of these issues come from, right? A lot of these issues, it's like
corporations.
Really, it's true, because there's a buck to be made, right? Like, if a corporation can find a way to make money off of something, they will. They will get there, and they'll do it because they want to make money. And as a society, we need to rein them in, because if we don't rein them in, they're going to do whatever they want, and they're going to walk all over people and the environment, and our society. We live in a society. Thanks, Reagan, for that comment.
That's one of the reasons we are so reliant. I apologize. We are so reliant on single-use plastics, because the packaging industry wants us to be reliant on single-use plastics so that, they earn money, right? But in the process of this, they are obviously polluting our planet. And then there's actually another cause of why we are so reliant on single-use plastics. And this is not the main cause, but we do lead a different lifestyle, most people do, than we did in the 1960s, right? We had more of a nuclear family then, less of a, super urbanized, hyper lifestyle, right? But now we do, and everyone is on the move a lot. So we rely on takeout and, being able to get coffee in the mornings, not at home, right? And that's okay. But we need to take that into consideration when we are looking at our use of plastic and when we are looking at reducing our single-use plastics, right? Because, of course, Tim Hortons, the billion-dollar corporation, can find an alternative to straws that are not a huge plastic lid. That helps no one. But we do need to take that into consideration, that we are living a different lifestyle now than we were back then. Okay. And then my last talking point, before we go into something a little bit more in depth about climate change.
But we're going to take a break in between.
We will take a break. Is kind of the zero waste movement. So I don't know if you've seen this on Instagram, or everyone really has seen this, because you guys have seen metal straws, right? Or pasta straws. Who's seen the pasta straw Instagram post? We have some, actually. We have pasta straws. Theo over here behind the camera has pasta straws at home. So that's kind of part of the zero waste movement, right? Which I think started as an Instagram thing. And it's just people trying to live a lifestyle with as little plastic waste and as little food waste as possible, right? And what we're really advocating for is a circular economy. So the principle of a circular economy is where, instead of, I have a plastic bottle, I use a plastic bottle, I throw away the plastic bottle, I buy a new plastic bottle, I have a reusable bottle that I use every day, right? So it's based on we're not throwing anything away, we're reusing, we're recycling, everything gets reused or continuously used, right? That's kind of a principle this is based off of. So I think that's what we need to be working towards as a society, right? Reducing our single-use plastic waste and kind of getting into that circular economy. Do you have any comments?
Not really. I think that was good. I liked it. I liked the Visco Girl impression. That was great. It was good. No, that's a good issue to cover, because that's been a big talking point lately.
And Canada is planning on enacting a ban of some single-use plastics as early as 2021. Keep in mind that phrasing, as early as 2021. Especially when it is not set in stone by any means.
Especially when it comes from Justin Trudeau. You have to be a little...
We have to be... I mean, it would be great if it did take place, and, full credit, but the way it is phrased specifically gives me some concern. Yeah. So we'll have to see where that goes. Yeah. We'll see.
So I think that was a great segment. Thank you very much, Emma. We're going to take a little break, and when we come back, we're going to explain climate change and why deniers are wrong. See you in 10 minutes. And we're back, and we're going to be talking about one of our favorite topics, and one of our what we feel is, the most important political issue is climate change. And for some reason, I'm on Facebook because I'm an old man, right? I go on Facebook a lot because for some reason I just gravitate there. It's probably not a good thing, but I'm there a lot. And I've seen lately is this weird spike. Maybe it's just among my Facebook friends, but this weird spike in climate change denial or speculation that somehow climate change is just a front for socialist revolution and like scary central planning. And it's like, I just wanted to go over some of the science because we need to remain really clear, because sometimes we get muddied in these silly arguments about, is climate change real? Is it not? And it is. It's a fact, okay? Let's make climate change the new gravity, okay? It's real. No pretending. Climate change is as real as gravity, and it's happening, and it's human caused. It is human caused, okay? So we're going to go over exactly why the climate is changing and why it's caused by humans. So we actually have a couple of graphs. So Emma's going to pull up my first graph. It's going to be great. It's all professional-like. So the first graph we have here, it shows that for 800,000 years before today, carbon parts per million had never gone up above about 300. Okay, 300 parts per million in the atmosphere. And you can see at around 1950, carbon parts per million spiked all the way up to about 400. Okay, so that's an increase of 100 parts per million. And it hadn't gone up there for 800,000 years. Okay, that is not a coincidence. Now we're going to go to the second graph. The second graph we have is atmospheric carbon dioxide and Earth's surface temperature, right? And I believe parts per million, carbon dioxide parts per million is on the right there. It's the scale on the right. And then the temperature is on the left. And then the scale is for years is on the bottom. And as you can see, there is a clear trend, which is the line, between carbon parts per million and the temperature. Now, obviously, they don't line up perfectly because the Earth's temperature is not always the same. It's not always going to increase by 0.2 degrees Celsius every year. That's not how it works. Okay? But in general, you can see on the graph that it is going up as it relates to carbon parts per million. And we know for a fact that that is us, the amount of factories and our cars that are spewing carbon into the atmosphere. So why are these graphs relevant, right? These, first of all, I showed you these graphs. I showed you these graphs because the amount of carbon we're putting into the atmosphere is insane from that first graph that you saw. And the reason why carbon dioxide is increasing the temperature of Earth's surface is because it's an absorbent of heat, right? And a little bit of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, like 2 parts per million, doesn't make that much of a difference. But we're talking over about, 100, less than 100, maybe 60 years, 100 parts per million going upwards, right? That is a huge change, and that doesn't happen. Just for perspective, I think I have a stat here. This is actually a quote from climate.gov, so it's very legit. The quote is, "To put those changes in some historical context, the amount of rise in carbon dioxide levels since the late 1950s would naturally, in the context of past ice ages, have taken somewhere in the range of 5,000 to 20,000 years, and we've managed to do it in 60. I'm sorry, just anybody who's potentially a climate denier, if you can't accept that as reality, then I don't know. You really have to take a hard look in the mirror. I mean, you can't say the difference of a 10,000 year change to a 60-year change. Historically, it's been roughly a 10,000 year change, let's say, and now it's happened in 60 years. The amount of carbon parts per million and the temperature that's gone along with it. You can't admit that that is obviously human caused. I'm sorry. And when 97% of climate scientists agree that this is what's happening, that it's anthropologically human caused, right? Scientific consensus is important, and that's how we move forward in science, is when we have a rough consensus. And 97% is not even a rough consensus, that's a consensus, right? Any political issue in a society that 97% of people agree upon, it happens, it changes, right? The fact that 97% of scientists agree, and we have an insane amount of our population that thinks climate change is not real, is crazy. And when you look at those graphs, really consider, Emma, could you pull up graphic 2 again? Look at that graph. That is obviously, that change, 100 parts per million, is caused by us polluting our atmosphere constantly. Big corporations are responsible for that, as well as our own carbon footprints, right? And look at the temperature. It is very clear that the correlation is between the carbon parts per million and the temperature. And those carbon parts per million are going up that quickly because of us. We are doing that, and we need to stop. Now, just to get an idea of the responsibility for that, 100 companies in the world are responsible for 71% of carbon emissions. I'll say that again. 100 companies in the world are responsible for 71% of carbon emissions. A couple of those companies are ExxonMobil, Royal Dutch Shell, and BP PLC, which is a British oil and gas company. I really think that anybody who's denying climate change, look at those graphs and tell me that that is not what's going on here. Give me an alternative. Why is this happening at a rate that it has historically never happened before? Why is this happening? I don't know. Tell me. I can't see an alternative. I don't know, Emma. Do you have any thoughts?
Are you really asking me?
No, not to speculate on climate denial, but
I don't
just
know.
how you feel.
Oh, well, I mean, it's real. Stop denying it. I'm not sure. I know that, just because I know we're giving a lot of stats here, but not really explaining how these carbon emissions contribute to global warming. And if you want a more detailed explanation, there's a great YouTube video that explains it with the example of a game called Tetris. So if you go into your YouTube search bar and you look up climate change Tetris explanation, you will find a great video that really shows in a very easy way how our Earth is warming and how our carbon emissions have something to do with that.
Yeah.
Take a look at it.
Yeah, so sorry, that's one thing I maybe didn't explain very well. Is our Earth is always in a greenhouse effect, and that's part of what climate change is. It's a greenhouse effect, but our Earth has always had the greenhouse effect. We have certain gases in the atmosphere that keep a certain amount of heat from the sun in. That's just how the world works, right? The greenhouse effect is natural. When it becomes not natural is when we're pushing in the carbon dioxide, and carbon dioxide absorbs the heat and traps it in. When we're putting 33% more than we've had in over 100 years, that's where the problem lies. Right? That's why the Earth is warming, because we're putting in an absorbent gas that's keeping the heat inside and not letting it out, as it has for a very long time. You know, I just think, man, I see, and the one thing I see a lot, and I've seen this on like Turning Point USA, although nobody gives that organization any credit, but if anyone's familiar with Turning Point USA, they'll say things like climate change policies are a front for socialist or communist revolution.
I'm not seeing the connection per se.
Sorry, it's like you have a point over here, and then they just take it like way over here. Like, where did that even come from? How can you possibly look at the environment and the way it's changing and the obvious reality that climate change is human caused and somehow connect that to communism? Like they just what they're doing.
It's propaganda, right?
And what they're doing is they go, what's the biggest boogeyman we can find? Yeah. They go, communism. So they go, okay, well, let's connect climate change to communism somehow.
And
so they
say
say
makes no sense.
So they
people are so against communism.
Yeah, and it's like, everybody's against communism, obviously. Well. But what they Emma, everybody is against communism, and it's just so like I don't get it. I honestly see these things and I just laugh because it's like, how can you believe climate change policies are an affront to communism?
That is obviously
it's
ridiculous.
Just insane.
But a lot of people don't believe in climate change because they don't understand how it works.
Yes.
So I think this is a really great thing to kind of, go over how it does work. But then again, so I say that, right? But then I've also met a lot of people who I think would be like smart, intellectual, informed people. And then they start to argue with me about climate change. Like I had a teacher argue about it with me the other day. He's like, climate change isn't real. What? Like, so it's very
It's-
strange. I'm not getting exactly where this is coming from.
Well, and part of it is too is certain organizations and affiliations that people already have. Those places will kind of put it in your ear, like, "Hey, climate change isn't real." You know, it's not necessarily. It's people are overloaded with propaganda and overloaded with information,
Yeah.
and that makes them kind of shut out of certain issues, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's what we have to address, and that's why we need to go back to the basic science of climate change, because we need to remind people what it's all about. It's not a propaganda machine. It's not a front for communism. It's not a front for socialism. It is an environmental issue that we need to take action on. And that doesn't necessarily mean, it doesn't mean government control of things. It means the government is going to put in place regulations to change industries, not governments taking control of industries to do it themselves. Not government is going to become this big scary machine that controls everyone. The government is going to put regulations, hopefully, into place that will make companies start to move off of carbon emissions, right? That is the reality of what the solution is for climate change. It's moving towards a more sustainable system with private businesses. But sometimes you have to direct private businesses to do certain actions, because sometimes those actions that you need to happen maybe are a little bit contrary to profit, right? And we help those businesses through, especially if they're small businesses. We make sure that they can survive through this transition, and we move forward together. It's not about socialism or central planning. That's just the big issue, because that drives me crazy when people talk about somehow climate change activists are like communists. I just don't like that. It just drives me nuts. Maybe that's not as big an issue as I'm making
I
it.
have yet to hear that.
I've heard it more times than I care to admit.
Wow. I've heard people deny climate change.
Oh, yeah.
I've never heard the communist one, but
yeah,
I mean,
I just wanted to go over the basic science and the solutions that are really proposed.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, is there anything else you want to say on this topic?
No, but I did realize I forgot something from my other segment.
Oh, okay.
So do you mind if I just go back
No,
into
yes.
that?
Go.
Awesome. So
Go.
just a tiny point, but we're talking about single-use plastics. We were talking about corporations, right? And we're talking about the fast food industry. And how the fast food industry really uses a lot of single-use plastic, right? And practices a lot of very wasteful and harmful policies. And one thing I forgot to bring up was this kind of greenwashing that often takes place, right? Where companies, do something to present themselves as environmentally friendly when really they are not being environmentally friendly. So I think a great example of this is the fast food restaurant I used to work at. So, right, everything is single-use plastic, everything is thrown out, there is no value for all of that stuff, but we have a recycling bin in our dining room, right? We have our regular garbage and we have a recycling bin. We did not recycle anything. It all went into the same dumpster, right? That is greenwashing. And our customers, that I would see them, actually taking time to sort for waste and putting stuff in a recycling bin, total waste of time. Everything went into the same dumpster. Did not matter. And that is the kind of thing I think we really need to be watching out for when we as individual consumers are trying to reduce our plastic waste, right? Corporations are not always doing what they say they're doing. I know that, I have friends who work at other big fast food corporations like mine, and they say it's the exact same way there. So don't take everything at face value when you are trying to reduce your plastic waste. Greenwashing is a huge problem now.
So,
Okay, I think that's all.
Yeah, I think that's all we've got for today. We covered a lot of points, talked about some environmental issues, talked about unionization. We always encourage you guys, after you watch the show, to go and do some research of your own on these issues, because you may find...
Watch the Tetris video.
Yes, go and watch the Tetris video. I'm not sure what it is. I've never seen it, but I'm sure it's great.
It's really good.
So yeah, go do your own research. Go get more informed. It's great, Be informed. Be an informed citizen, a political activist. So as usual, subscribe, share the show with your friends, because it really helps us. The views are great. Share it with a few of your friends who might like it. Subscribe. Thank you very much for watching our 6th episode. Hopefully I'll post my video of me looking for glass bottles very soon. And have a great night.